scripture reading is from the book of Acts, chapter 4, beginning in verse 13. Now, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated common men, they were astonished, and they recognized that they had been with Jesus. But seeing the man who was healed standing beside them, they had nothing to say in opposition. But when they had commanded them to leave the council, they conferred with one another, saying, "What shall we do with these men? For that a notable sign has been performed through them is evident to all of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and we cannot deny it. But in order that it may spread no further among the people, let us warn them to speak no more to anyone in this name." So they called them and charged them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered them, "Whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God, you must judge. For we cannot but speak of what we have seen and heard." This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated, and I'd like to invite Ralph Ford as he comes up to the lectern up here. Like I said, Ralph joined in 2021. I'm sure he's going to talk about himself, but I'll introduce him a little bit. He's part of on Sunday morning, our flannel club. You'll see a group of men hanging out on the patio, all of whom wear flannels together. It's really fun. Come on up, Ralph. And also his wife Ruby is here tonight, and they have 3 little girls he'll share a little bit more about. But welcome, Ralph. Can we give a warm welcome to Ralph?
Just need to correct him. This is plaid, not flannel. It's a different fabric. So, like he said, my name's Ralph Todd, but if this doesn't go very well, just remember me as Matt Colden. So, I have my wife Ruby. We've been together since I was 19. I've got 3 girls, Raylan, who's 8, Cara, who's 5, Elena, who's 3. God saw fit to bless me with all girls when I thought that I was going to have one boy and end it there, and then realized how much work boys were. So God knew what I needed a lot more than I did. Let's see. So the song I picked for tonight for Dana to sing was Psalm 144, and it talks about blessed be the God who trains my fingers for battle and my hands for war. And I picked that one because she had to fight me to get me to come up here. But it's mostly because I felt like a lot of my early, or I should say like the middle of my life faith story was a lot of a battle for me. And it also has a lot of strong ties and symbolism in Job because, it talks about like, what is man that you should exalt him, that you should set your heart upon him, and you should visit him every morning and test him every moment. And so Job has the same feeling that psalm contains of like, the psalm takes it in a positive way of why God do you focus on man and actually pay attention to him when he's so much lower than you? And Job is taking it from the standpoint of why are you persecuting me? And then it also talks about how, man is a shadow, his life is like a breath, it passes away very quickly. The psalm captures that same sort of sentiment. So I guess to start, my faith story would be when I was 2. So I was born to my mom, who was 19 at the time, and my father, who was 46. And while he was dating my mom, he started cheating on her with this other woman, Lydia, and then ends up leaving my mom when I'm 2 to go with Lydia. And my mom had gotten pregnant, and for whatever reason, she decided to keep me at that point. So it was a tumultuous upbringing, right? Because I had 2 weeks with her, 2 weeks back with my dad, and Lydia was the first person to introduce any sort of Bible to me. And what's funny is I remembered the Bible very clearly in my mind. It was kind of like this mustard yellow with red etched text in it. And I happened to look it up just while I was preparing for this, and it turns out that it was actually a Jehovah's Witness, like my kid's first Bible, basically, so I'm glad none of that part stuck. But it was one of these things where you would hear, oh, Jesus did this, oh, Jesus did that kind of thing, but it wasn't something that was reinforced day to day. And so it was more of kind of like a novelty to where I would say that this was like my casual Christian phase. where, if somebody asked me, oh, what religion are you? I'd say, I'm a Christian, but did I pray? No. Did I enjoy going to church? Not really. That kind of stuff. By second grade, I started attending a school in Sun Valley called Village Christian, and I went there from second all the way through 12th grade. And so we would have chapel on Thursdays, we would have mandatory Bible classes, was part of like every single year that we were there. And so I got kind of filled up with the Bible as far as like I have a good memory, I can remember these kinds of things, I can quote verses back fairly easily, but none of it was really making an impact with me. In fourth grade, I had a teacher named Miss Brown, and Miss Brown, we always had to do memorization verses, and she would set them to a song to make it easier for kids to remember. And so the verse, out of all the verses that she did the entire time, the only one that stuck with me was Joshua 1 verse 9, which anyone who knows me sees, like I'm always wearing a hat, it says Joshua 1:9, it's my favorite verse. And it says, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not be afraid or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And so that always just kind of stuck with me, even if it didn't have much, I don't know what you would call it, like a changing power in my life. It was just the verse that was always in my head. It was set to the Pirates of the Caribbean theme, so it was easy to remember, I'm not going to sing it up here. I won't subject you to that. This is already going to be bad enough. But so around 12 years old, we started going, my mom started taking me to Shadow Hills Presbyterian Church, where I got baptized. And it was more of like you're supposed to be baptized, so I got baptized. Nothing in my life really changed other than that at that point, but I also started getting very kind of burned out on having to do Bible things. Every day I'm going to Bible class, every Thursday I'm going to chapel, and I just didn't feel like doing it anymore. So I told my mom, I'm not going to church anymore, I'm tired of it, right? And she didn't put up much of a fight with it, and so now I had all the free time I wanted to play video games or do whatever on Sundays, as opposed to focusing on God. That continued that way for another 4 years until I hit 16, and my dad, who was diabetic, he was out working, he stepped on a nail, and he didn't notice it because he has, like a decreased circulation to his extremities, and so he couldn't feel his feet most of the time. So the only reason he knew that he'd stepped on the nail is when he got home from work that day and he went to take off his cowboy boot, and he could not. And then he turned it over and he saw that there was a nail in there. He had to pry it out, so he took a little bit of Neosporin, smeared it on it, called it good, and ignored it, basically. Then, Then it started getting really infected. He kept ignoring it. He went to the hospital for it, and the doctors, they told me that he was turning septic. Garrett warned me, he said, if you're not healed from it, don't present it. But, so yeah, he started turning septic. They started having to amputate toes, basically, one at a time off of his foot. And they told me that he was probably going to die that night. And when they told me that was the same day that the landlord told us that because we hadn't been paying our rent, we were also getting locked out of the house in 3 days. So I needed to find a way to clear out the entire house and also try to connect with my dad before he dies. And at 16, it was kind of a lot. And then I remembered, you know what? I know exactly what to do in this circumstance. I've got an ace in the hole. God can fix everything, right? So I go out in the backyard and I'm praying, I'm crying out, and nothing changed. I didn't feel like a supernatural presence. The sheriffs were still coming in 2 days after that, and I still had to find a way to solve all of this on my own. So I got a drunk cousin of mine to rent just a massive U-Haul. I found a sketchy place that would rent a U-Haul to a 16-year-old, and started clearing out the house. I got a bunch of my middle school buddies to come over and basically just help me load everything that we could fit into this truck, on this truck, and then dump it into a storage unit. I spent, for me at that time, it was my life savings, call it, $5,000 or something like that, trying to get all of the arrangements done, pay off the outstanding bills that my dad had, all of this kind of stuff, all in the meantime while doctors continuously tell me, this is probably the last day for your dad. He was continuously throughout the whole thing. And unbeknownst to me, my dad was nearly unkillable. There's a long-running thing in the Todd side of the family that all Todds die at 72. So going back like 6 generations, every male dies at 72. My father was probably the toughest man I ever saw, and he died at 73. So he beat everybody else in the family. But yeah, so at that point I decided, you know what, if God is not going to help me in my greatest time of need, then I don't need God. And so I just kind of fell away from Christianity. I became more of like an agnostic than anything else. And around 19 is when I met Ruby. We started dating. I was still an agnostic at this point, and I was also kind of like an obnoxious agnostic, but I repeat myself, where, it was like, oh, you believe in Christianity? Oh, how foolish of you to do so, right? And Ruby had a cousin, Roger, who's very firm in his faith. And so the fact that we're, dating, we're going to all the family events and stuff together, Roger's typically there, and I have this great working knowledge of the Bible from going from second all the way, through high school in a Christian school and studying the Bible all the time. So I know the questions I can ask to push back and kind of like strike his faith. And the whole time I'm trying to like cause him to stray, and thank God I was never successful in it. But, the whole time that I'm doing that, we're just arguing theology, and my dad ends up surviving from the septicemia. He continued to lose, he ended up losing the front half of both of his feet, and it was very ironic given what he used to do for the Italians in the old days. And so it's one of these things where like you look back and you see that maybe God isn't punishing you, maybe he's punishing someone near you. And because you're a 16-year-old, you're like, it's all about me. I'm the most important in this story. And realistically, it's like, no, sometimes other people have to receive their justice. And sometimes you're just caught in the crossfire of that. So while Ruby and I are dating, she was going to church with Roger, her cousin, on and off. And then I think as a result of me just disparaging faith and not wanting, and not going to church with her, she ends up stopping going to church because I imagine it would also be disheartening to have to go to church constantly by yourself and not be able to go with the person you love. So she stays away from church for a while, and when I hit 25, I get a voicemail from Lydia, the lady who had first introduced me to the Bible and everything. She had left my dad when I was 7 to date his cousin, so at least she kept it in the family. And so she was very much like persona non grata from the time I was 7 to 25, more or less. And she called me to tell me that my dad had died. And it was rough. I was Ruby and I had gone to see a movie that night, so I didn't actually get the phone call. I just got the voicemail after the fact. And I definitely cried in the car with her for a long time. And I became very hostile to God at that point. So now I was more of like a combative agnostic, where I was actively seeking to pull people out of Christianity at that point. So any person that would listen to me, I would stand on my soapbox and point out what I saw were flaws in the Bible, things that I saw as logical inconsistencies, anything I could do to try to like hurt God for hurting me, basically. I stayed that way for probably like 5 or 6 years, and then eventually you just kind of lose your zeal for being a jerk and you settle down. So, at 30, we had Raylan, and so now I've got a little one that's taken up all of my time and my mental energy, so I don't need to worry about fighting with people about Christianity, things like that. And around the time Raylan turns 3, we need a preschool for her to go to, and one of the best preschools in our valley is Christ Lutheran, and I wanted her to be able to go to Christ Lutheran because I wanted her to go to good preschool, but they have a massive wait list. And then I found out that if you're a member at the church, then you get priority waitlist registration. So in a self-serving way, I start coming to the church. We become members like that, I want to say it was like within a month or two, they had, Pastor Garrett had led one of like the become a membership thing, and then I was just like, sign the papers, let's do it, He's like, you want to see your statement of faith? I was like, I got it, I'm good. But so Raylan starts going to the preschool, and we start coming to the church because you can't just dump your kids somewhere and not know the people they're going to be around, right? You kind of want to scope out the situation. So I'm now going to church, and as a result of going to church and listening to the word again, it causes me to want to affirm how right I am about how wrong Christianity is again, right? And so I start looking into all of the questions that I had in the past about, why Christianity is wrong, why Garrett and I battle about predestination. Don't think I missed that you put a predestination song on my night. I saw that. And so I'm just doing a ton of like rigorous research into something that really should not concern someone who says that they don't care about Christianity, right? Because in my head I was like, God doesn't care about me, ergo I don't have to care about God. So as that's going on, I decide I'm going to text Ruby's cousin Roger because I know that he does Bible study. Maybe he's got something different about. So I'm texting him about his interpretation of predestination, and he asked me, why does this matter to you if you don't believe? Right? And I was like, that's a really good question. Why am I wasting so much mental energy trying to prove that I'm right about something that I don't believe, unless some piece of me actually still does believe, right? And so I slowly started to find that all of the questions that I had in the past were actually very easily answerable if you put the time and the effort into researching the answer. And I find that most people just have not done that. And so very slowly, I never had like a Paul, on the road to Damascus, like bam, my faith has been restored. It was a very slow, logical drip line of my faith slowly kind of being built back up. And I think God knew that that was the only way to draw me back to him, was to give me this slow and logical path back, because I've never had that, just like, oh, I could feel it in my bones kind of moment for it. I also find that, at 16, when I was like, I can't handle this, I can't tolerate anymore, I find that many people will say things to that effect of like, I can't take it anymore. And then you see them the next day, because the problem is that God knows how much I can take, and I have a far shorter view of what I can take than what God knows I can. And so as a result of that, when I used to look at the story of Job and I saw injustice from God, now I look at it and I see this great revelation from God to Job, where, Job by the end of the book says, my ears had heard speech of you, but now my eye sees you, right? And it's just this great moment where Job has realized, like, oh, I've always listened and heard other people talk about God, but coming face to face with the almighty creator of everything, I realize how small and how insignificant my questions and my problems truly are. And if Job can get past all of that, then, I can get past my dad dying, which was foreseeable. It's not like somebody who gets sick like that and then, stays septic and has diabetes and cirrhosis and all the other things will live forever. So I've always connected a lot with Job 23:10, where he says, but he knows the ways that I take. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold, right? Because it's not until you've gone through the crucible with your faith that you realize how strong your faith can make you. And it also reveals the impurities that were in your faith to begin with. Because I feel like if I'd never actually had any of this test, I probably still would have been in that casual Christian phase where if someone said, hey, are you a Christian? I'd say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. It's like, do you go to church? Do you pray? Do you study the Word? Do you have a relationship with God? Not so much, but I claim Christianity. And now I have a very fervent faith, as anyone who talks to me knows. And, so after that point, it was like both feet in, jump in, ask Garrett if I can teach classes at the church. I did a prophecy class. I did a whole class on Job that I enjoyed very much, just the study aspect and everything like that. And while I was doing all of that, I was researching for Job, and one of the books I picked was by this guy named Hugh Ross. And Hugh Ross, his book on Job, he said that anyone who studies Job will typically have trials similar to Job. And it was during the time that I was studying Job that my sister, who lives in Florida, a hurricane came and destroyed her house. And then Ruby developed some severe arthritic issues to the point that I had to help get her dressed and things in the morning. And so the kids and I were praying over her every night, and she kept wondering if this was what God had for the rest of her life. And I kept saying, I don't think this is what God has in store for you. And eventually God worked a full miracle in her and restored her health, removed the Dupuytren's contracture from her hand, just everything that the doctor said would not happen reversed in Ruby, and I'm firmly believing that it was a miracle straight from God, right? So at that point, Pastor Garrett comes up to me. He says, hey, has Matt talked to you about his secret plan for you? I said, no, I don't know what you mean. He said, well, Matt's going to try to get you to go to seminary. And I was like, seminary? Matt is crazy, right? That's just not me. And then Ruby was asking me something about the Bible one day. I'm giving some long-winded answer, as I'm wont to do. And she goes, you should go to seminary. And I scratched that. I'm like, yeah, you would think that, but, your wife has to think highly of you. It's in the contract, I think. Then soon after that, my mom calls me, and she's reflecting on why she doesn't like the story of Abraham and Isaac, where Isaac is about to be sacrificed, and I give her this long diatribe about why it's beautiful, because it gives us the principle of penal substitutionary atonement and all of this, and she goes, so when are you going to seminary? And I'm like, listen, that's not what God wants for me. I go to Bible study. I started going to Bible study with Roger, and then while we were there, we had a guest speaker. This guest speaker comes up, he talks for a while. Afterwards, I'm talking to him, and he goes, God has something that he wants you to do, but he says you're not ready for it yet, or something, right? And I'm like, all right, listen, God, if you really want me to hear you, send me another person to tell me to go to seminary school. About a month goes by, and a buddy of mine, Ben, comes over, and the last time I'd seen him was probably like 6 months prior, and he comes over, and he's lost a ton of weight, he looks very healthy, and I'm like, oh, look at you, look at what happened to you. He goes, I saw what God was working in your life, and I came to Christian faith, based on what he was doing for you. Have you considered going to seminary? And at that point, I was like, connection's a little fuzzy, God. But at that point, I said, okay, fine, I will go to seminary school. And so I started looking around, I started applying to places, and my mom, I was like, but I can't afford it. And my mom goes, I'll pay for it. I'm like, okay. So I set a place, I enroll, I do all of this, and then I text her, I'm like, hey, are you still willing to pay for seminary? She's like, oh, we need to talk about it. And so I'm like, okay. I pray on it, I go, God, if you want me to go, have her pay. If you don't want me to, don't have her pay. And that'll be like the easiest way for me to tell. And then she texts me like an hour later, she goes, yeah, make the payment and then I'll just send you whatever. And so I'm like, okay. And so since July 2025, I have now been enrolled in seminary, and I'm looking to do whatever God wants me to do at this point in my life. But every day is a gift from him. I would say that by God's mercy, I get to stand here today, because by God's justice, I would have died at 16. I think that's it.